Thank you, everyone. So my name is Stani Kulechov. I'm the CEO and founder of AAVE, and we're gonna share my presentation. So today we're going to go ahead about DeFi for institutional DEGENS. So the idea is here that I give a small presentation what AAVE is as a protocol, and how it affects the whole DeFi ecosystem, and also what the AAVE ARC market is and how it differentiates with the current DeFi landscape and what kind of benefits there are. So first about the AAVE protocol by itself. So there might be a lot of people here today that know decentralized finance pretty well. For example, there's maybe some of you have been kind of using all of the DeFi protocols and looking for the next alpha and looking where to ape in. But some of you might be very kind of newly exposed to the ecosystem and industry, and I have to say that welcome. There's a lot of things going on all the time, and so essentially the AAVE is the liquidity protocol, and it's one of the biggest ones out there in terms of when we measure TVL, so how much value is locked in the smart contract, so how different kinds of DeFi users are actually holding value and trusting those smart contracts that the Genesis team and the community has built together. And the protocol itself has had over $1 trillion worth of transactioning volume, and it's been quite rigorously audited by different kinds of independent security auditors. So normally when you create a protocol and build it, you deploy with 1-2 audits. At AAVE, we are in a kind of like a position where we innovate quite a lot, but because of the amount of innovation, we want to make sure that it's as secure as possible, and we made all the efforts we can to ensure that we have proper security and diligence in place. So that's important for us, and we also do formal verification and economical verifications and modeling, financial modeling and stress testing as well. And that's kind of like very important part when we build protocols that they're scalable, but also there's also a lot of third parties involved and looking at the code and how the protocol itself works. So essentially how it works is that there's 3 kind of agents when you interact with the protocol, and you don't interact with peer-to-peer fashion, but it's actually peer-to-contract whenever you're interacting with a Web3 protocol. There's suppliers, there's borrowers, and there's so-called liquidators. So most of you and most of the users are actually simply suppliers in the protocol. So you might have different kinds of cryptographic assets. It might be ETH, it might be AAVE, it might be let's say stable coins, Bitcoin, or any other governance token that is whitelisted into the market, and you supply assets to earn yield on those assets. And the positions are liquid in the sense that when you deposit into the protocol, you can also withdraw assets out of the protocol, and simply as long as there's liquidity, which is the most of the cases, unless there's some sort of like a situation which corresponds to some so-called bank run. And this is very convenient because then you don't lock in capital, but you can actually reutilize the capital, hold funds in short term, mid-term, long term, whatever is the strategy. And then, of course, another way to utilize the protocol is to be a borrower, in the sense that when you are supplying assets into AAVE protocol, at the same time, those assets become for you in terms of collateral. So you can draw other assets by locking in whatever you supplied. And very common thing is that you supply, for example, ETH or other assets that you are in long position, and you want to unlock liquidity. So you draw stable coins you might use those stable coins in somewhere else in decentralized finance or Web3, or you might then convert them into, let's say, real dollars and use them in real economy, paying bills or whatever is the finance goal. And of course, like, because the protocol itself, it's decentralized, there's also so-called liquidators and liquidators networks. So anyone can actually participate in upholding and upkeeping the protocol's solvency, in the sense that if those collateral values decreases substantially, let's say on an account basis, under what the collateral value is compared to what that particular user has borrowed, the liquidators can actually liquidate the position and make the account whole again. And this is actually very important because it keeps the protocol safe economically and sound. So that has been like a very important part of actually the whole network. And the assets aren't kind of separated. So when you are depositing anything into the protocol, they're pooled. And pooling is a way to actually create capital efficiency. So normally when we look into, let's say, relationships, financial transactions, they are usually peer-to-peer, especially when we call peer-to-peer, or in institutional sense, in TradFi, bilateral. So you have two parties agreeing on something, whether it's some sort of a repurchase agreement, loan, or something else. But the way that decentralized finance tries to improve capital efficiency is that we quite a lot tend to pool assets, and interactions are pretty much peer-to protocol, in the sense that you are never matched with another liquidity, but actually you are either supplying and drawing from the pool, and the protocol itself becomes like its own entity that is also governed by the AAVE governance that will come later. And the interest rates and everything in the protocol itself are adjusted with the supply and demand. So there's interest rate curves depending on the different assets, depending on how much demand there is, and the governance can actually change those interest rate curves. And of course, the assets that are in cryptographic assets in general are very volatile, and for me it's very surprising and amazing to see that over the past years we have seen a couple of market drops where we see cryptographic assets decrease in value substantially, and the DeFi protocols, especially AAVE, upholding that network value, and those liquidations work. So that has been like a very good example where in decentralized fashion you can actually create very solvent and scalable products. And of course, since there's many components where the protocol has to evolve over time period, and not just evolve, but the protocol risk parameters needs to be changed depending on the market conditions. So in the AAVE protocol, as the protocol runs autonomously on Ethereum blockchain, it's also governed autonomously with by the AAVE token holders, which is the AAVE community. So the AAVE token holders, they come together and vote on different kinds of decision making. They either add or subtract risk from the protocol, meaning they make risk-based decisions, what kind of loan-to-value ratios you have with different assets, so how much you can borrow against the collateral, what are the interest rate curves, what are, for example, new assets that could be listed into the protocol, and all this decision making is risk-based, or even updating smart contracts from one to another. And AAVE currently, the Genesis team is building the version 3, meaning that we have roughly 11 or actually more, roughly 50 billion worth of value locked in all of the networks in version 2. And at some point, those assets needs to be upgraded into the version 3. And that's something where the governance actually needs to make a on-chain decision-making on the transactioning. So as the token holders are making those risk-based decisions, they also can transfer the risk to themselves and stake AAVE into the safety module and bear the risk of any kind of a shortfall event. That could be a exploit, that could be a failed liquidation. And it's a nice, interesting feedback loop that the community has to empower the network. And mainly now what we have been focusing on is creating a more institutional market, which is the ARC market. And the idea of the ARC market is that we have seen a lot of interest from institutionals regarding participating in decentralized finance, but maybe not being able to do that either in a compliant way, or there's just too much of regulatory uncertainty. And for the solution, what we created is a completely new separate market that runs in parallel with the permissionless market that we have in mainnet, Polygon, and Avalanche. And the market, the ARC market, the idea is that you actually have a so-called whitelister functionality that can whitelist depositors, the borrowers, and liquidators into that market. And once they pass certain type of common agreement, that common agreement can be different kinds of, for example, compliance rules or liquidity rules or anything that they want to actually have in that market as a differentiator that what we have in the permissionless market. So the idea here is that in the AAVE market, you have higher compliance requirements, which means that the institutions are more eager to actually participate in the market where they cannot participate yet in the permissionless DeFi. And this creates a kind of like a sandbox environment for institutions to actually participate in DeFi before there's more clarity for them. And they are getting most of the benefits. For example, there's the transparency of what public Ethereum blockchain provides them. So also the security of the Ethereum network, and also the smart contract-based transactioning. So you see the code, how it transacts, and there isn't much anything else that the code can do besides what it's being designed for. And of course, knowing the peers at the same time and being able to get yield in a cryptographic environment is very important. And pretty much like this particular slide shows quite well, the differences between the current main liquidity pool that we have on Ethereum and the ARC liquidity pool. So the liquidity is completely segregated in the sense that the main liquidity and the ARC liquidity aren't meshed in that sense. In the main liquidity pool is available to anyone, so anyone can actually come and supply liquidity, borrow, become a liquidator, also build new innovation on top of the main liquidity market. And in the ARC market, you have the process of whitelisters that needs to whitelist to enter into the market. And currently, the first whitelister is Fireblocks, which provides institutional services, wallet services, connectivity to exchanges and DeFi protocols through their customer base. And the idea that is over time, that whitelister base continues to increase substantially, making it even more decentralized from that perspective. And this is a kind of like an interesting to see like how after a while, as the institutional market evolves, how we will see kind of like the crossing gap between the ARC market and then later to the main liquidity market. And both of these markets are actually governed by the AAVE token holders, meaning that the AAVE community offers, as the same way they are offering tweaking the risk parameters into the main liquidity pool, they're doing the same for the AAVE ARC liquidity pool. So, for example, listing new assets, changing the interest rate curves, other risk parameters, and that's all done by the AAVE governance. So the AAVE governance is actually they're decision makers on the institutional market, which is very cool concept. And for institutional perspective, it brings them way to scale liquidity in the sense that if something works smart contract wise for small numbers, it can be scaled to bigger numbers over the period of time, and there's no paper-based transactioning. Once you get whitelisted, you can transact in very seamless fashion as you will do in DeFi. You can create programmability. You can build various institutional products on top, and there's a lot of actually demand for that. And the way the ARC market is created is pretty much the code base is the same as the main liquidity pool, added with the permissioned functions, meaning that the code base is already battle tested in the main market. And of course, you have the whitelisters actually deciding what kind of participants you have. So you have this additional kind of like a compliance there, which makes for these institutions and then compliance teams easier to participate in the market. And there is growing demand for ARC. There's a lot of inbound coming in participation. So it's interesting to see how the volumes will increase. And yeah, so of course, like in the sense that the how technically it works, of course, there's two type of whitelisters. There's whitelisters who will list directly non-custodial addresses. For example, in Fireblocks cases, you can be you can have a non-custodial multi-signature wallet in your entity, and you can, after whitelisting, you can participate into the ARC market. Or it can be a whitelister that has customers that are actually holding funds on their behalf, so custodial. So they're whitelisting their own custodial addresses and bringing those interactions on a more user-friendly custody way into their clients. And those kind of users will be more of the users of, let's say, banks that are crypto friendly, fintechs, all of those entities that are more leaning towards actually holding customer funds and being that service provider to them. But also the interesting part is that there's also, especially in the Fireblocks case, you have non-custodial institutional users, which makes it very exciting. And interestingly, the governance works pretty much the same way as it will work in the main AAVE market. And there's a main difference is that the whitelisters actually have the so-called veto privilege for certain time period, which is, for example, 2 days after a vote. So the AAVE governance makes all the decision making, and the whitelisters, because they pretty much spin up the market, they can veto a decision that, for example, might be risky in terms of compliance. For example, adding an asset that maybe for some reason will not fulfill the requirements of the compliance, or the market will not be right yet for that particular asset, or the risk parameters, they can veto it. But after time period of 2 days, what happens is that veto period ends and the proposal is going into production, which is very cool. And of course, as AAVE ARC market is as any other market in the AAVE protocol, it means that the AAVE token holders, even the governance, can actually enable safety module cover even to AAVE ARC market, and even add liquidity mining incentives, which kind of like attracts more and more that institutional coverage. So those are kind of like things that probably the community have to at some point think about it, especially when the market starts to grow and there's more users involved. And that's about it. So in terms of like logistics, the ARC market has been deployed already, and Fireblocks is the first whitelisted entity in the particular market, and there's more coming in the pipeline, and the actual market itself, first whitelistings are happening as we speak. So probably next week we'll see a lot of interesting deposits in the market and liquidity aggregation, and hopefully over time we'll see the market grow substantially over institutional kind of like needs. But for us, like for AAVE, and being a Web3 builder, believing in decentralization and permissionless technologies, we hope that the market will be kind of like a jump board from that particular liquidity into the permissionless DeFi. So as a sandbox, it's interesting to see how it evolves, but it might become actually one of the gateways for institutionals to participate in wider DeFi over the time. And that's it. There will be more information and statistics soon on the market itself, and I hope everyone enjoyed. And if there is anyone who is more interested in the ARC market, feel free to reach and me on Twitter or anywhere else. Thank you so much. I don't know if there is any time for questions or how does this work, but I'll leave it up to the moderators. Thank you.
We'll have a moderator joining us shortly.
And of course, if you are institutional or interested in the ARC market, pretty much Fireblocks has been the initiator of the particular market, and it's available for their user base. So that's an interesting entity to talk with.
All right, now we're going to take some questions from you all and get Stani to answer them. So anyone have any? Yeah, go for it. Yeah, can we get some more details about V3?
Well, I was planning to save some alpha for later on V3, but V3 is very cool because V3 allows V3 brings sort of capital efficiency in the sense that of course, like, it's the most, I would say, risk averse protocol built so far because it has not only the supply cap, the borrow caps that are known in the space, but also this kind of like an exposure cap with asset segregation. So assets can be listed in so-called isolation mode, where one particular asset with low market capitalization would not affect the rest of the assets that you might have in your account and in overall exposure in the protocol. So that's like very interesting. And from another interesting part there is that you can actually you have this kind of like a high leverage, I would say high efficiency mode, E mode, where you can actually go very high LTV with assets that correlate very close to each other. For example, having DAI stablecoin as a collateral and borrowing USDC at 98% LTV. And things are becoming more interesting when you can use something like USDC as a collateral and borrow a Euro stablecoin with that high kind of like efficiency. You can do FX trading essentially as well. So it's very fascinating. And the third interesting thing there is that you actually can have this so-called like you have this portal mode where ports in the portal can become whitelisted A token minters and burners. So essentially, a bridge can mint in a permission fashion A tokens and burn them, meaning that you can actually swap through the Aave protocol between one chain to another, one L2 to another L2, which changes the way of actually how the bridges are managing their liquidity. And it makes more them sense to actually hold their liquidity in A tokens and control the A token swapping between networks. So that's very cool. And there's a lot of bridges actually already testing the feature out.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's one question about the onboarding. I think Fireblocks is the entity to reach out about the Arc because they have seamless onboarding there. So that will be the entity to talk. It's their market that they initiated and deployed. So I recommend to contact them.
Got it. Got it. So let me know if I get every part of that right. So if they can vote yay or nay, if there's differences in the fork, what was the second part of your question with the sandbox? Yeah, how are you reconciling the differences in the system if the AAVE token is used for both?
Yeah,
I don't, yeah, okay. Is that clear? I don't know if I fully understood that question. So
yeah. So the interesting here is that the A token minting and burning is capped in the sense that how there's overall cap between different like how much in total they can be like unbacked and back. Well, actually unbacked A tokens between the bridges, and then there's like a second thing is that what can be done also like there's whitelisted the minters, but there can be also like sub caps. And also like token economics could be used on how much these different bridges are actually allowed to in a permissionless fashion to mint up to the kind of like a hard cap ceiling. But essentially, it's accounting between the different chains of how much you have backed and unbacked, and then it's reconciled in the way that you always have the same amount of end of the period of time depending on the chain. So that's the kind of like a way to handle it.
got it. Thank you. Yeah. Are the LTV changes dynamic or do they require a vote?
Well, this is an interesting thing because the version 3 has this so-called risk, like kind of like a risk manager, like I would say like a function where the asset listing can be delegated to any contract, which meaning that now how it works is that the Aave governance pretty much handles it, but it can be delegated to so-called risk DAO that is actually evolving now in the Aave community. But beyond that, for example, it can be also delegated to a smart contract that could have, for example, depositing, the Aave token and increasing those LTVs in a liquid fashion up to a certain depth cap. But that's something that has to be built. But the actual V3 feature of being able to delegate, like governance being able to delegate the listing of assets to other contracts is now built in. So that's something that can be built on top, where you have dynamic LTVs based on, let's say, staking of Aave. And I think that's something that people would like to see being built in the community.
Got it. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah. How does the fund's whitelist work with the mechanism that they're investing into AAVE ARC, you said? Investing into AAVE ARC on behalf of many other participants. So how does that whitelist work?
So the whitelist is a simple way of just whitelisting an Ethereum address that can be a EOA or smart contract, which can be, of course, like a multi-sig address. So in that case, if you are a service provider where you custody the user funds, let's say that your users are institutions, they don't want to deal anything with the self-custodying and flipping ledgers and that kind of stuff. So in that case, you simply, as a whitelister, get whitelisted your own custody addresses. But that's just a technical thing.
Got it. Any other questions? Yeah. What's the use of the fund for users afterwards? Once they're inside ARC.
Yeah, so in terms of ARC, you essentially, well, the seamless thing is that when you deposit, you're earning, but then from the borrower's perspective, they're drawing liquidity out of the ARC market, and then they're using it in most cases. What we understand they're using in trading desks, for example, trading the funds across, I would say, like a CFI lending desks. There's also probably entities that will arbitrage between the ARC market and the permissionless DeFi as well. But in case of the borrowing side, it's pretty much unlocking collateral value. For example, if you are a fund, you hold, let's say, 500 million worth of Bitcoin, you want to actually leverage that and get liquidity out of there. So you could borrow a couple of 100 million worth of, let's say, stable coins and use that in trading activities, for example.
Any other questions? Alrighty, well, sure, no one else? Okay, got it. Well, thank you. Anything else you want to say?
There's one question about the put on hold the L2 deployment. So actually, the version 3 is already internally, we're testing it on layer 2s. So we have we're testing it on Arbitrum, and we're testing it pretty soon on Optimism. But the idea is just to test, of course. It's up to the community to decide where to deploy. In my opinion, it can be even deployed at the same time across all of the networks, because the protocol has supply depth caps and everything. So it can it can be done quite risk-averse way. But that's up to the community how to do the V3 deployment strategy.
Yeah. What's your experience been developing with the Polygon Matic network compared to other L2s?
Polygon, like Matic, like their chain, it's definitely was like first to adopt, like the DeFi ecosystem, and it's like most used. There's more infrastructure. The experience has been good. Avalanche has been good, but at the end of the day, as long as there's EVM, it's easy to deploy. All this networks that have you need to configure things and you need to rebuild from scratch, that's very problematic, because building something like AAVE is very resource intensive, and I will not like to build that from scratch. In AAVE v3, for example, it's the iteration of AAVE v2, but way more improved in terms of the code base and everything, but it's not from complete scratch. So AVM helps, transport the protocol to other networks.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you for speaking today. I really appreciate it, and hope everyone had their questions answered.
Thank you, everyone, and happy Sunday.